The air in Maple Falls, Oregon, hung heavy with the sweetness of summer that evening in 2002. The sun had dipped just beyond the tree line, painting the quiet streets in amber and gold. 16-year-old Sara Mills waved goodbye to her best friend, Emily Parker, from the porch steps of a small white house. "Text me when you get home," Emily said with an easy smile, but Sara just laughed, tucking a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "I will, promise." Those were the last words anyone would ever hear from her. If you love real-life mysteries finally solved, subscribe to our channel for more gripping true stories that uncover the truth hidden behind ordinary lives. Sara's house was only half a mile away, a 10-minute walk down the quiet stretch of Willow Creek Road. The night was mild, the kind of evening where neighbors watered lawns and porch lights flickered on one by one. She never made it home. When the clock struck 10 and Sara's bed was still empty, her mother, Elaine Mills, felt a prickle of unease crawl through her chest. By 11, unease became panic. Her father, Tom Mills, grabbed his car keys, his voice trembling as he said, "I'll check the park. Maybe she met someone." But deep down, both knew something was wrong. The Millses called the police shortly after midnight. Within the hour, patrol cars rolled through the darkened streets, their lights cutting through the fog rising off the nearby lake. Officer Laura Jensen, only 23 and new to the force, stood at the edge of the driveway holding Sara's photo, a smiling, freckled face framed by summer sunlight. "We'll find her," Laura promised, though her voice betrayed her inexperience. The next morning, Maple Falls awoke to a sense of collective disbelief. Posters appeared on telephone poles. Search dogs traced paths through the woods. Helicopters circled the hills beyond town. Neighbors formed search parties, calling Sara's name into the wind. Every lead ended the same way: silence. As hours stretched into days, theories began to whisper through coffee shops and classrooms. Some said Sara had run away. She'd been distant lately, they claimed. Others swore they saw a strange car on Willow Creek Road that night. Each rumor deepened the ache of uncertainty. Elaine sat by the window for days, eyes fixed on the driveway, waiting for the flash of Sara's sneakers. Tom refused to leave his job at the sawmill, clinging to routine as though normalcy could summon her back. The Mills home filled with officers, friends and casseroles from concerned neighbors, but the one thing they needed most, answers, never came. Detective Laura Jensen found herself returning to the Mills residence every day, driven by something she couldn't yet name. The case became more than duty, it became personal. "Someone knows what happened," she whispered one night, staring at the flickering police map marked with red pins. "They always do." By the end of the week, Sara's name was on every local headline. Her face, frozen in that photograph, became the haunting emblem of Maple Falls' lost innocence. And though the search continued, each setting sun carried with it a growing dread. What if Sara wasn't coming home at all? By sunrise, Maple Falls was no longer the peaceful town it had been the day before. Police cruisers lined the streets, their radios buzzing with updates that led nowhere. Volunteers gathered in front of the community center, coffee in hand, faces pale with worry. "We'll find her," someone said, but the words fell flat, heavy in the morning air. The forest that framed the town, usually a place of weekend hikes and laughter, had become something darker, a maze that could swallow secrets whole. Detective Laura Jensen stood near the search map, tracing the path Sara would have taken home. "Half a mile," she murmured. "How does someone vanish in half a mile?" Her partner, Officer Mike Reynolds, shook his head. "We've searched the roads, the lake, the park. Nothing. Not even a shoe." Laura's jaw tightened. "Then we keep going. We don't stop until we know." Dozens of residents volunteered to join the search. They combed through underbrush, shouting Sara's name into the still air. Dogs barked, pulling at leashes. The smell of pine and damp earth hung thick around them. A local news van arrived, the reporter's voice trembling slightly as she broadcast live from the town square. "It's been 24 hours since 16-year-old Sara Mills disappeared from this quiet Oregon neighborhood. Police and volunteers continue to search the surrounding woods." Inside the Mills home, the atmosphere was unbearable. Elaine sat on the couch clutching Sarah's favorite sweatshirt. "It still smells like her," she whispered. Tom paced the floor, restless, eyes red from sleeplessness. "They need to check farther out," he said to Laura when she stopped by that afternoon. "Maybe someone picked her up. Maybe she got lost." His words carried hope, but his tone was hollow. Laura knelt by the coffee table covered in maps and search grids. "We're expanding the radius tonight," she told him gently. "We'll find something, Mr. Mills." Yet deep inside she feared the truth that no one dared speak aloud. Disappearances like this, no witnesses, no evidence, rarely ended the way anyone hoped. As night fell, flashlights bobbed through the woods like fireflies. The cold crept in, numbing fingers and hearts alike. Emily Parker joined the volunteers, guilt written across her face. "If I'd walked her home," she said quietly, but Laura placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "This isn't your fault. You were just kids." Still, Emily couldn't meet her eyes. Day 2 turned into day 3. Helicopters scanned the riverbanks, divers explored the lake. Nothing. The small-town chatter that once centered on school games and weather had shifted entirely. Doors were locked earlier. Parents walked their children to school. A fragile sense of safety had cracked. By the week's end, the police chief called an emergency meeting. "We keep the search active," he said, "but we may be looking at something criminal." The room fell silent. Laura felt the words sink into her bones. Something criminal. As she left the station that night, the wind rustled the pine trees, carrying with it the faint sound of the searchers still calling Sarah's name. Each echo faded into the darkness, unanswered, leaving only the uneasy truth that Sara was still out there, somewhere, and time was already slipping away. By the second week, the story of Sara Mills had reached every corner of Oregon. Local news anchors repeated her name nightly, her school portrait, bright smile, denim jacket, flashing across screens. At first, the town welcomed the attention. The more eyes searching, the better the chance of finding her. But soon, Maple Falls became something else entirely. A stage for speculation. Reporters parked along Main Street, cameras poised at the edge of the Mills property. Neighbors whispered, "They're like vultures." Yet deep down, many watched the broadcasts too, hoping for a clue the police had missed. Elaine Mills sat stiffly in her living room as the cameras rolled. "We just want our daughter home," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom sat beside her, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles whitened. The reporter leaned forward. "Do you believe someone took her?" Tom hesitated, eyes glinting with exhaustion. "I don't know what to believe anymore, but I know my daughter didn't just disappear." Detective Laura Jensen watched the segment later that night, the glow of the TV flickering against her tired face. She could feel the public's hunger for answers pressing down on her. "It's turning into a circus," Officer Reynolds muttered. Laura nodded. But sometimes pressure brings people to talk. Over the following days, tips poured in by the dozens, sightings, confessions, and false leads. A gas station attendant claimed he'd seen a girl matching Sara's description getting into a dark sedan. Another caller insisted Sara had run away to Portland. Each lead demanded time, and each one led nowhere. At Maple Falls High School, the halls felt different now. Teachers avoided eye contact when students mentioned Sara's name. Lockers were covered in yellow ribbons, and a large banner hung near the cafeteria. "Bring Sara home." Emily Parker, the best friend left behind, stopped attending class altogether. When Laura found her sitting on the bleachers one afternoon, Emily's eyes were red. "They keep asking if I know something," she said bitterly, "like I could ever hurt her." Laura shook her head softly. "People ask questions when they're scared. It doesn't mean they think you're guilty." Theories multiplied like wildfire. Some claimed a traveling worker had been seen near the woods. Others said Sara had planned to meet someone secretly. Radio hosts debated her disappearance between songs, turning her name into a headline instead of a person. Elaine refused to turn off the television. "If they stop talking about her, people will forget," she told Tom. "I can't let that happen." Tom, staring out the window toward the pine trees, whispered, "They already talk like she's gone." For Laura, the weight of the case grew heavier each day. Every failed lead felt personal, Every unanswered question, another stone on her chest. Late one evening, she stood beside her car outside headquarters, listening to the crickets. "Someone out there knows the truth," she murmured, "and they're watching all of this." In the distance, the soft hum of the news van's generator carried through the still air, mingling with the low murmur of reporters rehearsing tomorrow's headlines. The story wasn't just Maple Falls' tragedy anymore. It had become America's mystery. And beneath the noise, the real truth remained hidden, waiting. Weeks turned into months, and then months into years. The posters faded under rain and sun, their edges curling on telephone poles. The search teams dwindled until only a few loyal volunteers remained, mostly older neighbors who refused to let the forest win. By the first anniversary of Sarah's disappearance, Maple Falls had learned to live with an unspoken ache. The Mills family still kept the porch light on every night, but even hope began to flicker. Detective Laura Jensen had long since traded her rookie badge for a detective's shield. She'd worked dozens of cases since then, yet the name Sara Mills stayed etched at the top of her thoughts. Sometimes, while closing another file, she'd catch herself whispering, "We never found her." The guilt never left. Every June, the community gathered at Willow Creek Park to hold a vigil. Candles lined the lake's edge, their reflections trembling on the black water. Elaine would read a short letter she wrote to Sarah each year. Never the same words, but always ending the same way. "We're still waiting, sweetheart." Tom would stand beside her, silent, gripping her hand as though letting go would mean surrender. Laura attended quietly, staying in the back. She never knew what to say to the Mills family anymore. "You did everything you could," people told her. But she knew that wasn't true. Evidence had been misplaced, witnesses forgotten, leads never followed. The case hadn't just gone cold, it had been buried under time and neglect. In 2005, the department officially downgraded the investigation's status. "No new evidence," the memo said. Laura read it twice, feeling the weight of each word. "So that's it?" she asked her captain. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "We don't have the manpower, Jensen. It's not like TV. You can't chase ghosts forever." She wanted to argue, but the words caught in her throat. Ghosts or not, Sarah deserved better. The Mills family tried to move forward. Tom returned to long shifts at the sawmill, his body aging faster than his years. Elaine began volunteering at the local church, hoping faith would fill the empty space that grief carved inside her. But every time a young girl passed by their house, Elaine's eyes followed her just a moment too long. Maple Falls changed too. The old grocery store closed, replaced by a hardware chain. Families moved in and out, and for the newer residents, Sarah's name was just a local legend, a story whispered by older neighbors to remind their kids to be careful walking home. Only those who had lived through it remembered the feeling of loss that had hung over the town like fog. One evening, Laura drove past the Mills house after another long shift. The porch light was still on. She pulled over and sat in silence, the faint hum of cicadas filling the air. 19 years had passed since Sarah vanished, yet the light still burned, defiant, unwavering. Laura whispered to the night, "I haven't forgotten you, Sarah." And though no one heard, she made herself a quiet promise. One day she would return to that case. By 2021, Maple Falls no longer looked like the town Laura Jensen remembered. The sawmill had closed, the diner had new owners, and the high school football field had been renamed after a local donor no one really knew. Yet some things hadn't changed at all, like the narrow curve of Willow Creek Road or the lake that still caught the morning fog in the same ghostly way. Time had moved on, but the memory of Sara Mills still lingered like a shadow the town couldn't shake. Laura was now 42, a respected detective in the county's cold case unit. She carried herself differently, more deliberate, more restrained, but there was still something in her eyes, a quiet restlessness. One afternoon, while sorting through old files, a familiar name caught her attention. Mills, Sarah, Missing Person, 2002. The folder was worn, its corners soft from years of handling. She stared at it for a long moment before opening it, her pulse quickening. Inside were yellowed photos, witness notes, and a copy of the original missing persons report. The handwriting, her own from nearly 2 decades earlier, made her chest tighten. 19 years, she whispered. And still no answers. Her new partner, Detective Rios, glanced over. You knew the case? Laura nodded slowly. Too well. That evening, she drove out to the Mills residence, though she hadn't been there in years. The porch light was still on, as if time itself refused to move past that night in 2002. Tom Mills answered the door, his hair now grey, his shoulders stooped. Detective Jensen, he said, voice carrying the faintest trace of recognition. It's been a long time. I'm with the cold case unit now, she explained. I'm reviewing old investigations, and I wanted to talk with you, if that's all right. Tom hesitated before nodding. The living room looked smaller than she remembered. On the mantel, next to family photos, was a single framed picture of Sara. The glass had a small crack running through it, like a wound that had never healed. Elaine joined them quietly, her expression tired but composed. They said there was nothing left to find, she murmured. But I never stopped hoping. Laura nodded. Technology's changed a lot since then. DNA, digital analysis, all of it. Cases like yours, they can be reopened with new eyes. For the first time, a faint spark flickered in Elaine's eyes. You really think it's possible? She asked. It's more than possible, Laura replied softly. It's time. Back at headquarters, Laura spread the files across her desk. Old evidence logs, photographs, transcripts. It felt like reopening a wound, but also like breathing again after years underwater. Detective Rios looked at the chaos and smiled. You always start your cases this way? Laura gave a half smile. Only the ones that matter. As the sun set over Maple Falls, casting long shadows across her office, Laura felt a quiet certainty settle in her chest. Something had been waiting all this time, buried in the evidence, in memory and silence, and for the first time in 19 years, she was ready to listen. Early one morning, the sound of Laura's phone shattered the quiet of her office. The call came from the county sheriff. Construction crew out near Willow Creek found something, he said, his tone measured but uneasy. A shallow burial site. You might want to take a look. By the time she arrived, yellow tape already circled the muddy patch of ground near the creek bend, barely a mile from where Sara Mills had last been seen. The air smelled of wet soil and pine sap. Workers stood off to the side, silent, their faces pale. A small crowd had gathered on the road, drawn by whispers that travelled faster than any official statement. Laura crouched beside the dig site as a forensic technician brushed away the last layer of dirt. A fragment of fabric emerged, faded but still distinct, pale blue cotton with a missing button. Nearby lay a rusted chain with a heart-shaped charm, split in half, the kind once shared between friends. Her chest tightened. Stop for a second, she said quietly. Let's document everything before we move another inch. Hours passed as evidence was carefully lifted and bagged. Among the items recovered was a broken necklace clasp and several bone fragments. The technicians worked in silence, the hum of cicadas rising in the distance. Laura stared at the evidence bags, her mind caught between disbelief and inevitability. 19 years of questions might finally have an answer, but it came at a cost no one wanted to name. Back at the station, she walked into the evidence room, the sterile light casting long shadows across the steel tables. Get me the old DNA files from 2002, she told Rios. I want everything. Clothing samples, hair fibers, whatever we kept. Rios nodded, already pulling up the archives. You think it's her? Laura hesitated. I don't think, I know. The state lab worked fast. 2 days later, the results came in. DNA extracted from the remains matched the profile taken from Sara's childhood toothbrush. Laura held the report in trembling hands, her throat dry. It's her, she whispered. The words carried both relief and grief, each syllable heavy. That evening, she drove to the Mills house. The porch light still glowed softly, just as it always had. When Tom opened the door, his expression changed instantly. He knew. You found her, he said, voice breaking. Laura nodded. We did. I'm so sorry. Elaine appeared behind him, her face pale and wet with tears. She didn't ask for details, only whispered, Thank you for bringing her home. Outside, as Laura returned to her car, the night air felt heavier. The mystery that had haunted Maple Falls for nearly 2 decades had finally reached its cruel answer. But now, a new question rose in its place. Who had put Sara there and why? Laura started the engine and looked once more toward the distant woods. "We've got her back," she murmured. "Now let's find the person who took her." The confirmation of Sara's remains reignited the investigation with a mix of relief and renewed torment. The cold caseboard, once covered in dust, now stood bright with fresh photos, maps, and color-coded strings stretching across 19 years of unanswered questions. Detective Laura Jensen stood before it in silence, tracing Sara's final steps with her eyes. "Everything we need is already here," she murmured. "We just didn't see it before." Detective Rios leaned against the desk. "Where do we start?" he asked. Laura tapped the map. "With the last night she was seen, June 14, 2002. We rebuilt it minute by minute. They began with witness interviews, pulling names from old files, neighbors, classmates, teachers, anyone who might remember something. Some numbers no longer worked, others led to people who had moved across the country. But a few responded, their voices cautious, softened by time. Most had nothing new to offer. Then Laura came across a note in the file. Emily Parker, best friend, last seen with victim. Emily now lived in Seattle, working as a nurse. When Laura called, the silence on the other end was heavy. "You're calling about Sara," Emily said finally. "After all these years?" "I need your help to understand that night," Laura replied. "Can we meet?" 2 days later, they sat in a quiet cafe downtown. Emily looked older, but carried the same guilt in her eyes that Laura remembered. She stirred her coffee without drinking it. "I still see her walking away," she said softly. She waved, turned the corner, and that was it. Laura watched her carefully. "Did anything seem strange that night? Anyone around?" Emily hesitated. "There was a car," she said after a long pause. "A dark one, maybe blue or grey. It slowed near the intersection, but I didn't think much of it then. I figured it was someone lost." She bit her lip. "When the news came out, I couldn't stop thinking about that car." Laura's pulse quickened. "Did you ever mention it to the police?" "I tried," Emily said, "but by the time they came back for another interview, they said there were too many leads. They told me not to dwell on it." Her voice cracked. "So I didn't." Back at the station, Laura pulled the original interview transcript. Emily's mention of the car wasn't there. It had never been written down. "We missed it," Laura said quietly, anger burning beneath her calm exterior. "We missed the one clue that could have mattered." She and Rios cross-checked vehicle registrations from that time, hundreds of them narrowed down by color and make. Most owners had moved, sold or scrapped their cars years ago. But Laura wasn't ready to let it go. "Someone in that car saw her," she said. "Maybe even knew her." As night settled over Maple Falls, Laura pinned a photo of a blue sedan to the board. For the first time in years, the silence in the room didn't feel like defeat. It felt like the beginning of something. The discovery of the car clue set something in motion, an invisible current pulling Laura deeper into the past of Maple Falls. She spent her mornings buried in archives, flipping through records written in fading ink, her nights walking through the quiet streets where Sara's laughter once echoed. The town looked harmless on the surface, but she was beginning to feel its cracks. Detective Rios leaned over her desk one afternoon, watching her scan old police reports. "You're looking for ghosts again," he said gently. "Maybe the trail's gone cold for a reason." Laura didn't look up. "Ghosts don't bury bodies," she replied. "People do." Among the old files, one report caught her attention. A call made 2 nights after Sara vanished. A woman had reported seeing a teenage girl running near the edge of Route 9, chased by someone in a dark vehicle. The note ended abruptly. Officer dismissed sighting as unrelated. The name on the dismissal line made Laura freeze. Sergeant Bill Harper, one of the lead investigators in 2002. He'd retired years ago and still lived nearby. She drove to his farmhouse the next day. Bill answered the door slowly, his once broad frame now hunched, eyes wary. "Detective Jensen," he said, surprised. Didn't think I'd see you again. I'm reopening the Mills case, Laura said, holding his old report. You logged a witness statement that was never followed up. He rubbed his chin. We had dozens of statements like that. Half the town thought they saw something. But this one described a car, a dark sedan, the same type Emily Parker mentioned. Bill's jaw tightened. I remember, he said after a pause. We looked into it. Belonged to Dean Harper. My nephew. Kid got harassed for weeks over nothing. Laura's stomach sank. Your nephew? Bill nodded. He was 20 back then. Knew Sarah's cousin. Hung around town that summer. But he moved out after all the finger-pointing. Wasn't fair. Did he ever speak to police? She asked. Once. He said he didn't know the girl. Bill's tone hardened. Look, Jensen, it was a mess. People wanted a villain. Dean was just an easy name. Driving back, Laura couldn't shake the unease. A family connection, a dismissed lead, a buried report. It was too convenient. She stopped by the archives again, pulling the employment logs from 2002. Dean Harper had worked briefly at Thompson's Auto, a small repair shop 3 blocks from where Sara disappeared. She visited the shop's owner, an older man named Earl Thompson, who remembered Dean well. Quiet kid, kept to himself, Earl said, wiping grease from his hands. Left town fast, though, didn't even pick up his last paycheck. Did he drive a blue sedan? Laura asked. Earl nodded slowly. Yeah, old Chevy. I sold it to him myself. Laura thanked him and stepped outside. The evening wind rustled through the trees, carrying a chill that didn't belong to the season. The town had buried its mistakes deep, but the truth was surfacing again, piece by piece, and Laura knew she had just pulled at a thread that wouldn't stop unraveling. The more Laura dug into Dean Harper's past, the more uneasy she became. Every file, every note, every memory seemed to point toward him, and yet his name had vanished from every official record after 2003. It was as if the town had quietly erased him. The thought gnawed at her during sleepless nights, when the caseboard glowed faintly under her office lamp. Detective Rios entered with a folder in hand. Got something, he said, setting it down. The state database pulled up an archived DMV record. Dean Harper owned a 1991 Chevy Caprice, blue. Laura's pulse quickened. The same make Emily mentioned. Better, Rios added. The car was scrapped in 2005 at a junkyard outside Salem, but the yard kept inventory logs. The upholstery from that model was preserved for material testing. Within hours, they had samples sent to the lab. Laura stood over the forensic table, watching the technician work under the sterile light. We'll run DNA and fiber comparisons against the evidence recovered with Sarah's remains, the tech said. It'll take a few days. Those days stretched endlessly. Laura busied herself rereading statements, retracing Sarah's last known path, but her thoughts always circled back to that blue car. When the call finally came, she answered before the first ring ended. Jensen, the lab technician said, his voice steady. The fibers from the car match the sample found on Sarah's clothing. It's a direct hit. For a moment, Laura said nothing. The silence felt enormous. You're sure, she managed. 100%. Whoever owned that car was with her the night she disappeared. Laura set the phone down, her heartbeat thundering. The weight of 19 years pressed on her chest, but so did something sharper, vindication. She grabbed her keys. Rios, we're taking a drive. They traced the address from Dean's last known employment records, an apartment complex in Idaho Falls. His driver's license photo, though dated, showed a man with sharp features and calm, unreadable eyes. If he's still out there, Rios said, what's our play? We verify everything first, Laura replied. If we're wrong, we destroy what's left of the Mills family. But if we're right? Her voice trailed off. Back at her desk, Laura pulled out an old photo of Sarah, smiling, eyes full of life. We're close, she whispered. I can feel it. Later that night, she drafted her report for the district attorney, outlining the chain of evidence. DNA, witness testimony, the missing car, the dismissed report. All of it converged around one name, Dean Harper. Yet beneath her determination lay a flicker of doubt. Why had the original investigation been so eager to let him go? Was it incompetence or something else? Rios noticed her hesitation. You think someone covered for him? I think, she said quietly. Someone didn't want the truth to come out. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping against the station windows like restless fingers. Laura stared out into the darkness, the town lights reflecting in the glass. For the first time in 19 years, the pieces were falling into place. But she knew that what came next would test everything she believed about justice. The warrant came through on a cold Friday morning. Laura stood in the hallway of the precinct, staring at the printed order as if it might vanish if she blinked. After 19 years, the name Dean Harper finally appeared beside the words, "Suspect in the murder of Sara Mills." Rios appeared behind her, jacket in hand. "We've got confirmation from Idaho PD. He's still living under his own name. Works maintenance at a housing complex." Laura folded the paper carefully, her expression unreadable. "Then let's bring him in." By afternoon, the coordination was in motion. Idaho officers moved quietly, their radios muted, the warrant sealed. Laura listened from her car as the updates came through the speaker. Target located, approaching, suspect in custody. Her breath caught. It was over, at least part of it. When she arrived at the local station hours later, Dean sat in an interrogation room, hands cuffed, posture composed. Time had aged him, but not softened him. His eyes were cold, steady, almost detached. He looked up as she entered. "Detective Jensen," he said calmly, as if greeting an old acquaintance. "You've been busy." Laura sat across from him, studying his face. "Do you remember Sara Mills?" A faint smile touched his lips. "Everyone in that town remembers Sara Mills." "She was found," Laura said evenly. "DNA connects your car to her remains." Dean tilted his head slightly. "That's impossible. I sold that car years before she disappeared. That's not what the records show." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Dean leaned back in his chair. "You really think you've solved it, after all this time?" "I don't think," Laura replied. "I know." He laughed softly. "You sound certain. Certainty's dangerous." Laura ignored the jab. "You left Maple Falls the week after Sara vanished. You never picked up your last paycheck. Why?" Dean's eyes flickered just for a second. "Because that town eats people alive. You either leave or become part of its stories. Or you run because you're guilty," Rios said from the corner. Dean's gaze shifted toward him, a slow, calculated look. "I didn't kill anyone," he said firmly, "but I know how badly you people need someone to blame. My uncle used to say the same thing." Laura felt the words land heavy. "My uncle." The same Sergeant Harper who had dismissed the original lead. She leaned forward. "Did he help you leave?" Dean smiled again, thin and sharp. "Ask him yourself." The interview ended with no confession, no remorse, just an eerie calm. But the evidence was enough. Dean Harper was charged and booked that evening. When Laura stepped outside, the sky had turned a dull gray, snow beginning to fall in light flakes. Back in Maple Falls, the Mills family received the call. Tom's voice broke as he whispered to Elaine, "They got him." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Elaine said quietly, 19 years, I don't even know how to feel." Laura stood in the parking lot, watching her breath rise in the cold air. It wasn't satisfaction she felt. It was something quieter, heavier. Justice, perhaps. Or the beginning of it. The trial of Dean Harper began on a grey Monday in late October. Reporters filled the courthouse steps before sunrise, their breath visible in the chill air. Maple Falls, once forgotten by the outside world, was suddenly alive again. This time with tension, fear, and a cautious hope that justice might finally arrive. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs. Tom and Elaine Mills sat in the front row, hands intertwined. They had aged into silence, their faces marked by grief and endurance. Detective Laura Jensen took her seat behind the prosecution table, a stack of notes before her. After 19 years, every detail of Sara's case had to be spoken aloud again. The prosecutor, David Langford, opened with steady conviction. Sara Mills was 16. She was a daughter, a student, a friend. Her life was stolen, and for nearly 2 decades, her family lived without answers. Today those answers stand before you. His voice carried through the room like a quiet storm. Dean Harper sat expressionless beside his attorney, his posture rigid. The defense wasted no time. The evidence is circumstantial, they argued. Fibers, DNA degradation, memories blurred by time. The state built its case on coincidence. Laura watched him carefully. He didn't flinch at the mention of Sara's name. When the first witness took the stand, a forensic expert confirming the fiber match, Dean's only movement was a slight adjustment of his tie. Next came Emily Parker, voice trembling as she recounted that last night. She waved goodbye, Emily said, her eyes glistening, and there was this car. I never forgot it. I should have said something sooner. The courtroom fell silent. The prosecutor nodded gently. You're saying it looked like Mr. Harper's vehicle? Emily hesitated, then whispered, Yes. Laura testified on the third day. She spoke methodically, walking the jury through every recovered piece of evidence. The necklace charm, the buried remains, the car fibers, the dismissed report from 2002. Her voice wavered only once when she described the Mills family's porch light, still burning 19 years later. During cross-examination, the defense tried to undermine her. Detective Jensen, the attorney said smoothly, isn't it true that much of this evidence could have been contaminated over time? Laura met his gaze. What's true, she said evenly, is that Sara Mills never came home. And the man responsible has spent 19 years free. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The judge called for order, but Laura didn't regret the words. They were the truth, raw and overdue. By the second week, the town was divided. Some doubted the case could hold. Others believed the verdict was already written in the Mills family's tears. Each day Laura sat through testimony that reopened old wounds, yet beneath the pain was a quiet strength. As closing arguments approached, Langford turned to the jury one last time. Justice may have taken 19 years to arrive, he said softly, but justice does not expire. Sara Mills deserves her name to be remembered not as a mystery, but as a life wrongfully taken, and finally avenged. The jury listened, still and somber. When the gavel struck to adjourn, the only sound left in the room was the low, rhythmic ticking of the courtroom clock, counting down to the truth. The jury deliberated for 3 full days. The courthouse sat in uneasy silence during those hours, as if even the walls held their breath. Reporters camped outside, waiting for the final word on a story that had haunted Maple Falls for nearly 2 decades. Inside, Tom and Elaine Mills remained in their seats, unwilling to leave, their fingers interlocked in quiet prayer. Laura Jensen sat a few rows back, her notepad untouched. Every sound in the room seemed magnified. The creak of wooden benches, the shuffle of shoes, the rhythmic tapping of her pen. 19 years of work, heartbreak, and unanswered questions all led to this one fragile moment. When the door finally opened and the jurors filed in, the air thickened with tension. The foreman stood, paper trembling in his hands. We, the jury, find the defendant, Dean Harper. He paused, glancing toward Dean, who sat rigid, jaw tight, guilty of second-degree murder. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Elaine covered her mouth, eyes wide with disbelief. Tom closed his eyes, tears slipping silently down his face. For a second, no one moved. Then the judge's gavel struck, and the spell broke. Dean didn't flinch. His expression remained eerily calm, almost defiant. As the guards approached, he turned toward Laura. You think this changes anything? He said quietly. You don't know what really happened. Laura met his gaze. Maybe not, she replied, but now the world does. He was led away in handcuffs, his footsteps echoing like punctuation marks to a sentence that had taken 19 years to write. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered, neighbors, reporters, strangers who had followed the story for years. When the news spread, some clapped, others cried. For Maple Falls, it wasn't celebration, it was release. Elaine and Tom stepped out into the afternoon light. Reporters swarmed, microphones flashing like insects. Mrs. Mills, one asked, do you feel justice was served? Elaine paused, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. There's no justice that brings your child back, she said softly, but there's peace in knowing the truth finally found its way home. Later that evening, Laura returned to the precinct, exhaustion washing over her like rain. The caseboard, once cluttered with photos and notes, now stood nearly empty. Only one picture remained pinned in the center, Sara's school portrait. Laura stared at it for a long time, her reflection faint in the glass. "We did it, kid," she whispered. "We finally did it." Rios entered quietly. "Press wants a statement," he said. Laura nodded. "Tomorrow." "Tonight I just want quiet." As she left the building, the evening sky glowed with the last traces of sunset. The streets of Maple Falls were calm again, washed in pale orange light. Yet beneath the calm, she felt the subtle ache of everything the case had taken. The years lost, the lives altered. Justice had come, but it hadn't healed everything. She looked toward the horizon and breathed deeply. Sara's story had ended, but the echo of it would live on, in the people, in the town, and in the detective who refused to forget. The verdict spread through Maple Falls like a long-awaited exhale. For 19 years, the town had lived beneath a cloud of uncertainty. Now, that cloud began to thin. The following weekend, hundreds gathered by Willow Creek Lake for a vigil, not one of mourning this time, but of remembrance and peace. Candles flickered along the water's edge, their reflections trembling on the gentle ripples. The same place that had once echoed with desperate search calls now carried only the soft murmur of gratitude. Detective Laura Jensen stood quietly near the back, her hands in her coat pockets. She had attended every vigil since 2002, but this one felt different. Around her, people smiled through tears, exchanging words of comfort. Children who hadn't even been born when Sara disappeared now held candles, guided by parents who had never stopped telling the story. Elaine Mills approached her slowly, the years of grief visible in her posture, but tempered by something gentler: acceptance. "You kept your promise," she said softly. "You brought her home." Laura shook her head. "You kept her memory alive. I just followed where it led." Elaine managed a small, fragile smile. "It's strange. For so long I prayed for this moment, but now that it's here, it just feels quiet." "Quiet's not a bad thing," Laura said. "It means you can rest." Across the lake, Tom Mills helped volunteers place a simple memorial bench near the willow tree that had stood since Sara's childhood. A small plaque read, "For Sara, light of our town, never forgotten." When he caught Laura's eye, he nodded once, a gesture that spoke louder than words. In the days that followed, Maple Falls began to change. Local businesses raised funds for a new scholarship in Sara's name, dedicated to helping students pursue forensic science, so no one else has to wait 19 years, Elaine said at the dedication ceremony. The story that had once defined the town through tragedy was slowly reshaping into one of resilience. Laura was invited to speak at the community center. Standing at the podium, she glanced at the crowd, neighbors, former officers, students. "Cold cases," she began, "aren't just about finding evidence. They're about remembering people long after the world has stopped talking about them. Sara's story reminded us that time doesn't erase truth. It only hides it until someone decides to look again." Afterward, as people lingered to thank her, Laura noticed a young girl about Sara's age had been when she disappeared. The girl approached hesitantly. "My mom said you never gave up," she said. "I want to be like that someday." Laura smiled. "Then you already are." That night, the detective returned to her office and found herself alone with the sound of rain tapping softly on the windows. The case file, now stamped closed, sat on her desk. For the first time, she didn't feel the urge to open it. Instead, she whispered into the quiet, "Good night, Sara." Outside, the porch lights of Maple Falls burned steadily, no longer symbols of waiting, but of peace finally found. The following weeks passed in a kind of muted calm. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, Laura Jensen no longer carried a cold case file home with her. Her desk at the precinct, once stacked with folders, photos, and maps, was now neatly cleared, except for one framed picture of Sara Mills. The edges had faded, but Sara's smile remained as bright as ever. Late one evening, long after everyone else had left, Laura sat alone in her office with the rain whispering against the windows. The hum of the city beyond was distant, softened by the fog rolling in from the river. She opened Sara's file one last time, her fingers brushing across the final entry. With a slow, deliberate motion, she picked up her pen and wrote, "Closure achieved, but not without cost." For a long moment she stared at those words. Closure. It sounded clean, decisive, but she knew it wasn't. Justice brought peace, yes, but it also carried a quiet grief for what could never be restored. She leaned back in her chair, letting the silence fill the space. Detective Rios knocked gently on the open door. "You're still here," Laura smiled faintly. "Old habits, hard to let go." He stepped inside, his expression thoughtful. "You did what no one else could." "That has to count for something." "It does," she said, "but it doesn't feel like victory, more like balance finally restored." Rios nodded. "I've been meaning to ask. After all this, what did you learn?" Laura looked toward the window, watching raindrops race down the glass. "That time hides truth, but it doesn't erase it," she said softly. "So you can bury evidence, silence witnesses, forget details. But the truth waits. It waits for someone stubborn enough to listen." Rios smiled. "Guess that makes you the stubborn one." "Guess so," she replied, her voice tinged with warmth. After he left, Laura stood and began gathering her things, her badge, her pen, her notes. She placed Sara's photo gently inside the drawer before locking it. For the first time, she didn't feel the pull to reopen the case. Instead, she felt something unfamiliar. Peace. Outside, the night had deepened. The streets glistened under streetlights, reflections shimmering across puddles. She walked to her car slowly, breathing in the damp air. Every sound, the rain, the distant hum of traffic, the echo of her own footsteps, felt amplified, alive. Before leaving, she turned back toward the precinct. The building's windows glowed faintly, like sentinels watching over the quiet town. She whispered under her breath, "You can rest now, Sara. We all can." As she drove home, the radio played softly, an old song from the early 2000s, the kind that once filled high school dances, maybe even the one Sara had attended. Laura smiled faintly, realizing that time hadn't just healed Maple Falls, it had changed her too. When she reached her street, she turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, letting the rain tap gently against the windshield. For the first time in 19 years, there were no loose ends, only the steady rhythm of life moving forward. Spring returned to Maple Falls with quiet grace. The air carried the scent of pine and blooming dogwood, and for the first time in years, the town felt whole again. The name Sara Mills no longer echoed through whispers of fear. It was spoken with warmth, reverence, and remembrance. At the edge of Willow Creek Lake, the memorial bench gleamed in the morning light, the inscription catching the sun, "Light of our town, never forgotten." Detective Laura Jensen visited early one Saturday, long before anyone else arrived. The path was lined with new flowers, fresh tokens from people who had known Sara, and from others who hadn't but still felt connected to her story. Laura sat down on the bench, running her fingertips over the engraved letters. "You changed this town," she murmured. "You changed me." A gentle breeze stirred the water, and she closed her eyes, remembering the night 19 years earlier when Sara vanished, and how everything since had been shaped by that single, irreversible moment. Back then, Laura had been a rookie officer filled with uncertainty. Now she was someone different, older, steadier, carrying the scars of truth and the calm that comes with closure. Tom and Elaine Mills arrived a few minutes later, walking hand in hand. "We didn't expect to see you here," Tom said, his voice kind, worn by time. "I wanted to say goodbye properly," Laura replied. "You both deserve that." Elaine smiled faintly. "We never could have done this without you." "You did more than I ever could," Laura said. "You never gave up." They stood together for a while in silence, watching the sunlight ripple across the water. Nearby, a few children skipped stones, their laughter drifting through the air, a sound that once would have broken Elaine's heart. Now, it made her smile. When the Millses left, Laura lingered a little longer. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a single white rose. She laid it gently beneath the plaque, whispering, "Rest easy, Sara. You're home now." She stayed until the sun began to climb higher, until the quiet no longer felt heavy but peaceful. As she rose to leave, she took one last look at the lake, the reflection of the sky shimmering across its calm surface. Back in her car, Laura checked her phone. An email from a journalist requesting an interview, another from the State Cold Case Unit offering her a new assignment. She smiled faintly. There would always be more work, more stories waiting for answers. But for now she was content to let this one rest. Before starting the engine, she looked toward the camera on her dashboard, as if speaking directly to those still listening. "If this story moved you," she said softly, "make sure to subscribe for more real cases, stories where time, truth, and humanity meet. And don't forget to click the video on your screen to follow another incredible solved mystery." With that, she turned the key. The road ahead stretched beneath a sky washed clean by morning light, endless, quiet, and full of possibility.